The Girl Who Could Fly by Victoria Forrester. Chapter 1. Piper decided to jump off the roof. It wasn't a rash decision on her part. This was her plan. Climb to the top of the roof, pick up speed by running from one end all the way to the other. Jump off. She didn't make plans in the event that she did fall, because if you jump off the roof of your house and land on your head, you really don't need any plans from that point on. Even Piper knew that. So that's what she did. She jumped clean off her roof. But before we get to what happens next, you'll probably need to know a thing or two about a thing or two. Piper lived with her ma and pa on a farm. It wasn't much of a farm, to be sure. Just an old clapboard house and a bank barn that leaned dangerously to the left. For longer than anyone could remember, the McLeods had lived in Lowland County on those same 20 rocky acres of land. Piper's grandpa and her great-grandpa and great-great-grandpa, and so on, all breathed their first, last, and everything in between right in the same house where Piper was born. And because of that, the McLeods never planned to live anywhere else. Betty McLeod felt that folks ought to stay in one place and not move around so much so that the Almighty knew where to find them if he needed to. If the good Lord wanted things to keep changing all the time, then the sun wouldn't rise up in the same way every blessed morning. Betty was a plain, no-nonsense, solidly round woman who believed in only two things: the good book and something she called Providence. As in, I told Millie Mae not to fool with that new-fangled gardening hoe. Can't say I'm not surprised them black beetles is eating clear through her tomatoes now. It's Providence, I tell you. Providence. Unlike Millie Mae, Piper McLeod never tempted Providence. Joe McLeod, a lanky man with sun-weathered skin, the color of brown autumn leaves, never said a word about Providence. But then, he never said a word much about anything. If pressed with a question, he likely pondered for a long stretch before finding the words to answer in his own measured way. Well, that's just the way things is. And the way things was plenty good enough for Joe McLeod. So it was in this matter that Betty and Joe quietly went about business of tending to their land as the seasons and years passed them by, one no different from the next. And never was it heard to be said in Lowland County that a McLeod didn't do things as they were supposed to be done. That is, until someone said precisely that. "No, I ain't. It's not the way of things," Betty McLeod argued with Doc Bell when he announced that she was pregnant. After all, Betty had celebrated no less than 25 barren years of marriage and was no longer considered a young woman. 4 months later, Betty McLeod birthed a baby girl. That baby girl was named Piper McLeod. "It's not the way of things," Millie Mae hotly declared to the ladies' Tuesday afternoon sewing circle, each one of whom immediately pressed her ears more closely inward. "Fancy a woman like Betty age prancing around with a newborn baby. A first-time mother at that. It ain't right." Many of the ladies nodded in agreement. Dire prediction soon followed that the child was sure to grow up queer in such circumstances, and without a sibling to boot. For the first time in her life, Betty McLeod was tempting Providence, and she knew it. She knew certainly she didn't need the whispers of local gossip to inform her of the fact. In an attempt to restore balance and appease Providence, Betty and Joe set about business of strictly rearing Piper in the prescribed way that the McLeods were raised, which is to say, without a lot of fuss and nonsense, and a solid portion of hard farm work thrown in for good measure. They were simple and honest farmers, and they didn't hold with any fancy child-rearing notions that some city folks got into their heads. Much to their relief, Piper was what every other baby was, at first. It was only when Piper reached the age when most babies were learning to crawl that her development took an entirely different turn. It was a Thursday afternoon, like any other, that Betty set about changing Piper's diaper on the kitchen table, no differently than she'd done 100 times before. When Betty turned away for just one moment, Piper rolled, quick as a flash, right off the edge of the table. Now any other baby would immediately fall onto the floor and screamed itself silly. Not Piper. To Betty's astonishment, Piper simply floated in the air next to the table. "Lord save us," Betty choked, her hand clutching the terrified swallow inside her chest. Piper giggled and bobbed up and down in the air. Betty quickly scooped Piper into her arms and held tightly onto her from that moment on. The word Providence flashed through Betty's mind. This is what you get when you don't do things as they should be done. The left side of her head said to the right. As time passed, and despite Betty's sincere prayers, the situation got worse, not better. Piper was discovered bobbing about the parlor ceiling and either wouldn't or couldn't return to the ground. Joe was dispatched out to the shed to fetch a ladder. Several weeks later, in the wee hours of the night, Joe discovered Piper asleep floating several feet above her crib. Then there was one particular gusty day when Piper suddenly took to floating and was swept up in a wind that carried her 3 full fields before she became snared in the branches of a tree and Joe was able to fetch her down. When Piper reached the age of 5 and was still known to unexpectedly float across the room, Betty finally felt it was time had come to broach the matter. "Seems like she ain't normal is all I'm saying," Betty helplessly offered to Doc Bell. "How's that?" Doc Bell questioned. Doc Bell had seen generations come and go, and all manner of things happen to them in Lowland County. He'd seen the youngest Smith boy cough up a screwdriver and a whole package of 2-inch nails. He'd been there when Clara Cassie American's head turned all the way around and then back again. Doc Bell had even seen a grown man talk backwards after he was bumped in the head by a hay bale. The little girl dangling her legs off an examining table had 10 fingers and 10 toes, was no taller or smaller, no smarter, no dumber, no thinner or fatter than a child her age should be. She was, in short, like every other child in the farming community of Lowland. "Well, Mr. McCloud and we've been noticing that she's," stammered Betty, not sure exactly how to describe her condition. "Well, she's a mite high-spirited." Doc Bell chuckled and turned away to wash his hands. "A child her age should have plenty of energy to spare, but it isn't nothing you need to worry yourselves about. Now, give her plenty of exercise and lots of fresh air. Nothing wrong with her. She's as normal as you and I." When Doc Bell turned back around, he discovered that Pepper had somehow managed to hoist herself 5 feet into the air, where she was dangling on the light fixture that hung from the ceiling. There she began to swing back and forth. For the briefest of moments, Doc Bell looked to Betty's alarmed face, and notion that Piper McCloud might indeed be more than high-spirited crossed his mind. Doc Bell was a man of science, though, so naturally he let the matter go. "You got a little monkey on your hands, Miss McCloud," Doc Bell chuckled. And upon medical recommendation and great relief, Betty decided to let the child be. All the same, she felt it wise to homeschool Piper until such time that her high spirits, however normal they might be, were, well, less high. By her 9th birthday, Piper had long nut brown hair that was fixed into 2 braids, bright blue eyes, which she liked, more freckles than the sky had stars, which she hated, and her most constant companion was loneliness, as well as some other feelings she couldn't quite place a name to. "Ever think something's not right, but you can't get at it, Pa?" Perched on the top of a fence, Piper watched Joe as he fixed a loose blade in the plow. Joe shrugged uncertainly. "It's like I got an itch right here," Piper continued, pointing to the midsection just below her ribs. "But I can't get at it, and it keeps scratching at me, but on the inside. You reckon maybe there's something that'll make it stop itching so?" Joe shrugged again. He often felt dizzy when Piper talked to him. It wasn't that the words she used were different. Heck, Piper talked like everyone else in Lowland County. It was the idea that the child got into her head. She asked a question he wouldn't have thought up in a million years, and he couldn't begin to figure out an answer to. "I told Ma about it the other day, and she figured it was caused by all the fool ideas I had in my head," Piper continued, heedless of her father's inability to respond. "I don't think my ideas were fool, but Ma says that I do better to keep quiet, keep my feet on the ground, and to mind my own business. She says it's wrong to be frittering away my hours asking questions when there's work to be done. But I don't see how a question can be wrong. Can you, Pa?" Ma says the Bible sets out what's right and what's wrong, so we don't have to bother ourselves with none. But it seems to me it ain't so matter of fact. Like when you killed the old cow last week. I didn't want to eat it because you were my favorite and so gentle besides. Ma said I was sinful to waste food. But I said maybe we shouldn't go about killing and eating cows when they so peaceful like. Ma said that it was foolishness and that God put cows here just so we can eat 'em. But that don't seem like a good deal for the cows to me. Preacher told us more than 4 Sundays ago that God loves all his creatures, but he ain't loving to my way of thinking to create a thing just for it to be food. Them cows ain't never done nothing to us, which got me thinking that maybe we got it wrong. Maybe they got a purpose that we don't know nothing about. Maybe it's a secret. So I started watching the cows, quiet like so they wouldn't notice, aiming to see if I couldn't guess that purpose. I think I know it now. Pa, I do. Want to hear? Joe drew his forearm across his brow to steady the dizziness. Somehow this conversation had spiraled out of control, and he was about to learn the secret destiny of cows. Revelation that Joe McLeod was not ready for. Not ready by a long shot. Had he known how to stop Piper from continuing, he would have. At last, all he could do was stand helplessly rooted to the spot Piper continued. Which, of course, Piper did. It was the way they flicking their tails to ward off the flies that gave it away. Piper leaned in, and Joe, and lowered her voice secretively lest the chickens catch wind of her words. You see, all of them was doing it, but one, the black heifer with brown eyes, was just standing real still, looking off to the next field over where the sheep was grazing. The flies were buzzing around her just the same as the others, but her tail stayed dead still. So I got to watching the cow, and every day she did the same thing until I realized what she was looking at. What? Joe said, breathlessly unaware that he posed the question. The place where her calf done died, none other than more 6 months for, remember? Joe nodded. Indeed, he did remember. It had been a difficult birth, and the weekend calf had only lived a few hours before it passed on. She's mourning him something terrible, and it seems to me that if a cow can feel for his young'un, then it's probably got feelings about all sorts of things, feelings we don't know nothing about. Then I got to thinking that if each of them cows got feelings, then they can have a purpose no different than us folks, which got me thinking on the purpose. Then I realized a person should get a handle on their purpose in life if they aim to do something about it. You know what I mean, Pa? Pepper looked into her father's face and only saw lines of confusion. Papa McCloud! Betty squawked as she emerged from the henhouse to find Joe, once again, standing like a fool, listening to the child. Joe sheepishly got back to work, working on the plow, while Piper scrambled from the fence. I was just telling Pa how I wouldn't care less about your fool ideas and stories. When there's work to be done, I expect you to do it. Now get. Several days later, in the heat of the afternoon, Piper escaped the biggest oak tree on the farm and climbed halfway up it to enjoy the breeze that rustled through the leaves there. The itch inside her was acting up and wouldn't give her any peace, so she rolled over on the branch and held her stomach. From her position, she could spy a robin landing on his nest where it began feeding a fat worm to her babies. Watching the robin, Piper let her mind wander. Maybe other kids my age have the same itch, Piper considered. Maybe if I could talk to them, they'd tell me how to get at it. There ain't a chance that was ever going to happen with what her stuck out on the farm at all. I never get to go nowhere to do nothing, Piper thought to herself. Only 2 places I've ever been is church and Doc Bell's. Why can't I go to school like them Miller kids? Piper had asked her mother 1,000 times. Each morning, Piper watched them from the hayloft walking to school. She had given her 2 front teeth to go to them. You do your schoolwork just as well here. That's why. Betty, as always, was plain and to the point. All of a sudden, Piper was roused from her thoughts by an unexpected drama that was falling on the branch before her eyes. The mother robin was nudging one of her babies toward the edge of the nest. The little fellow was hardly bigger than Pepper's thumb. It had a smattering of feathers poking out at him. Using her beak, the robin gave her baby a good shove that pushed him clear off the nest, over the branch, into the air. To Piper's horror, the baby robin dropped like a stone in the fury of wing flapping. But then, just as he was about to hit the ground, he managed to pump his wings so hard that he stopped falling and he started slowly, very slowly, rising. Right then and there, that little bird learned to fly, and Piper saw the whole thing. Holy moly, Piper breathed and shook her head in wonder. It was the darndest thing she'd ever seen. Then the mother robin did it again with her second baby, was born into flight. By the time the third baby was being ready for takeoff, Piper was struck by a lightning of an idea. Piper sat bolt upright on the branch, almost falling off it completely. Grabbing hold with both hands, she steadied her body while her mind raced like a jackrabbit. From that moment she was born, Piper had floated. It came naturally to her, like breathing, because she's always done it, but she didn't think it was such a big deal. One minute she'd be sitting on the rug in the fence to the fire, and next she'd be bobbing up to the ceiling. It happened all the time, and it was fun. The problem with floating was that you never knew where it would take you, which wasn't all bad, but sometimes a person likes to have a bit more direction in their life than to be at the whim of any strong breeze. There's a big difference between floating and flying. Clouds float. Balloons float. But birds fly. Maybe Ma and Pa forgot to push me like them baby birds, Piper considered, knowing full well that she was going to have to take matters into her own hands. It's high time I got to flying too. Not wanting to waste any more time, Piper quickly shimmied down the tree trunk and immediately set forward, mutilating a pan. The next morning, Piper woke up. Before the rooster crowed, the sky was just beginning to glow in the east as she eased her way out of bed. Pushing open her window, she was able to slide across the ledge until her feet hit the shingles. From there, it was hard work to crawl up to the ridgepole. She stayed on her hands and knees and moved slowly. The roof was slick with dew. Just one wrong move, and quick as a flash, she'd slide right off. She kicked her long white nightgown away to stop it from tripping up her feet. It was when Piper had climbed to the very top of the roof and was balancing on the ridgepole that she realized exactly how scared she was. To be precise, she was terrified. All of a sudden, Piper knew there was a big difference between planning something and actually doing it. The roof was steep and high, and below the ground it was hard as a rock. If things went wrong, she was going to get hurt, and hurt badly. Piper's breath caught in her throat for a moment, and she couldn't breathe at all. Her thoughts came fast and furious then. What if I can't fly? What if I smack the ground with my head? Maybe my brains spill out all over the place, and then I ain't never going to get far and make a friend. Maybe it's best I hightail it back to bed and forget the whole notion. Now, perhaps because Piper didn't yet believe in a right way or wrong way of doing things, and so for her, all things were possible. Maybe it's because the itch deep inside Piper that no one, least of all herself, could get at was itching so much it was going to drive her crazy. Or it could have been the same reason why Piper was able to float, which is to say, no one really knows. Whatever reason it was, Piper stayed on the roof and didn't go back to bed. Instead, she raised her arms up at her sides like an airplane and placed one foot in front of the other. With fear, courage, and anticipation all mixing together in her stomach, she began to walk the ridgepole of her house. Just below Piper walked, Betty woke with a start. She had heard something, and that much was certain. "Mr. McCloud!" she hissed. Joe didn't stir. "Mr. McCloud!" This time, Betty punctuated her words with a sharply placed elbow to Joe's ribs, and his eyes flew open. "There's someone on our roof." "What's that?" Joe mumbled, half awake. "The roof! Someone's on our roof." Betty pointed upward, and Joe heard a scuffling sound above his head. With each step Piper took, she picked up speed until she was running down the ridge while the fast approaching the place where there was only sky and no roof left. Like the birds I will fly, Piper imagined the baby robins. And then there was only one step left to take. Piper took it, thrusting herself with abandon into the morning air. It was the cows gazing in the field that were the only ones to see Piper's trajectory. What they saw was a small girl in a long white nightgown jumping out the roof into the sky. For one blissful moment she hung in the air like an angel. Then, just as quickly, the moment passed, and the same young girl fell headfirst like a freight train toward the ground below. The cows had never seen a human do such a thing. Before they watched in mooless astonishment, Not much ever changed on the farm, and even cows can do with a bit of excitement. And just as Piper approached the first bedroom window, it flew open, and Joe, with his 12-gauge shotgun in hand, poked his head out. Joe was completely prepared to deal with the mischievous raccoon or the sassy brown squirrel trying to nest on the roof again. He was even ready to tangle with one of the pesky Carlton boys out rabble-rousing. A young girl whirling through the air in an attempt to fly, however, was completely outside Joe's McCloud's repertoire of possible evaluations. Ah! Piper screamed as she screwed her eyes tightly shut. What the? Joe's eyes bulged at the sight of Piper plummeting at him. He threw himself backwards to avoid a head-on collision and ended up tripping on Betty, who was lurking fearfully behind him. His long legs tangled around themselves, and he was sent sprawling onto the bedroom floor, which was a good thing, too, because he placed himself in the perfect spot to cushion Betty's fall a moment later. So positioned, they did not see Piper falling past their window. In 3 seconds, Piper was going to hit the ground head first. It was going to hurt a lot. Now, 3 seconds isn't a long time. You can count to 3 faster than you can read this. See? Try it. The largest of the cows, the one with the big black patch across its right eye, let out a moo in spite of himself. If it was possible to understand a cow mooing, it was likely he was trying to warn Piper. Piper's eyes were squeezed shut, and her face twisted in certain anticipation of the incoming impact. She was more than a heartbeat away from eating dirt when the miraculous happened. Like a plane in the air show, Piper grazed the ground in a death-defying loop that changed her course by 180 degrees and turned her face from the ground to the sky. She sailed upward with an unexpected thrust and precision of an F-22 Raptor. With her eyes clenched shut, Piper continued to brace for an impact that never came. Cock-a-doodle-doo, the rooster crowed. It wasn't until Piper was touching the blue and gold of the rising sun, and the mist of the cloud doused her face with a fine, cool tickle, that she allowed herself a tiny peek through her right eye. The vision she caught out of it was so surprising and strange that she closed it tightly again. She tried the view from her other eye, and it proved to only mirror the first glimpse. Slowly, very slowly, she opened both eyes. Oh, but what a world she saw! The green fields rolled out in every direction, and glistening streams cut through some of them. The clouds disappeared into mist, and the closer she flew towards them, the breeze lifted her higher. Piper dipped and dived, twirled and whirled in a sky that was every color from white to blue to orange to pink. "Whee!" Piper gracefully screamed. "I can fly!" she called out to the morning sun. "I can fly!" In the farmhouse below, Joe and Betty unsteadily rose to their feet, gripping the edge of the windowsill. They peered out and caught their first glimpse of a little girl in a white nightgown flying through the air. And at long last, there was no doubt in either of their minds that their daughter, Piper McCloud, did not do things as they had always been done. For once, Betty could think of nothing to say. Instead, she watched Piper fly back and forth until the world began to spin and black dots appeared before her eyes, and she sank down to the floor in a dead faint.